Hi everyone, my name is Marcus, and today we will see through some arguments in favor and against God's existence. So enjoy and get nice and cozy. The fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument posits that the universe is so precisely calibrated for life that it must have been designed by an intelligent agent. The constants of nature, such as the force of gravity, the charge of an electron, and the mass of a proton, are all incredibly fine-tuned. If any of these values were even slightly different, life as we know it would not be possible. This fine-tuning is seen as a sign of deliberate and purposeful design, which many argue is best explained by the existence of a creator, God. At the heart of the fine-tuning argument is the observation that the fundamental physical constants and laws of the universe are set to values that allow for the emergence of life. For example, the strength of the gravitational force is precisely balanced in such a way that it allows stars to form and burn for billions of years. If the gravitational constant were slightly stronger, stars would burn too quickly, and life could not evolve. Conversely, if it were slightly weaker, stars would never form. Similarly, the strong nuclear force, which holds atomic nuclei together, is also finely tuned. If it were stronger or weaker by a fraction, life would not be possible. In fact, the number of fine-tuned constants in the universe is staggering. The cosmological constant, the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force, and the ratio of proton and electron masses are just a few examples. These constants must all be within incredibly narrow ranges for life to exist. The fine-tuning argument uses these observations to assert that the universe is highly improbable, and that such precise conditions cannot be explained by random chance. Instead, proponents of the argument suggest that the most reasonable explanation for this fine-tuning is the existence of an intelligent designer, God, who calibrated the universe's parameters to allow life to emerge. This argument is often explained in terms of the multiverse theory, which posits that our universe is just one of many, in a potentially infinite series of universes, each with different laws and constants. Some proponents of the multiverse theory argue that our universe is simply one where the constants happen to align in such a way that life could develop. However, critics of the multiverse theory argue that it fails to provide a testable or falsifiable explanation for the fine-tuning. Even if other universes exist, it does not account for the incredible precision and improbability of our universe's laws. Another objection to the fine-tuning argument is that the universe may not have been fine-tuned for life at all, but rather life adapted to the universe's laws. In this view, life may have arisen in response to the universe's conditions, rather than those conditions being specifically chosen to support life. While this perspective challenges the assumption of fine-tuning, proponents of the fine-tuning argument point out that the odds of life arising under such narrowly defined conditions are so extraordinarily small that it seems highly unlikely to have happened by chance. One of the strengths of the fine-tuning argument is that it appeals to common sense and intuitive reasoning. The laws of nature appear to be finely tuned for life in the same way that a watch is finely tuned to keep time. When we observe a watch that is perfectly calibrated, we naturally infer that it was designed by a watchmaker. Similarly, when we observe a universe that is finely tuned for life, the most reasonable inference is that it too was designed. The fine-tuning argument also finds support in the field of cosmology. As scientific understanding of the universe deepens, more and more evidence supports the view that the universe's parameters must be exquisitely fine-tuned for life to exist. For example, the Big Bang theory suggests that the universe began from a singular point and expanded rapidly. The conditions that followed the Big Bang had to be incredibly precise for stars and galaxies to form, let alone life itself. The fine-tuning argument is also significant because it provides an alternative to naturalistic explanations of the universe. Naturalistic explanations, such as those based on the laws of physics, often assume that the universe's laws and constants are simply the way they are by default. However, proponents of the fine-tuning argument argue that this view cannot account for the precise calibration of the universe's laws, suggesting instead that there must be an intentional cause behind them. In conclusion, the fine-tuning argument suggests that the universe is so finely tuned for life that it must have been designed by an intelligent agent. The precise values of the physical constants and laws of nature seem too improbable to be explained by chance alone. While alternative explanations such as the multiverse theory, or life adapting to the universe's conditions exist, the fine-tuning argument remains a powerful reason for the belief in a creator, who is posited to have intentionally calibrated the universe to allow for life. The problem of hell. The concept of hell, as traditionally understood in many religious traditions, is one of the most troubling and controversial aspects of theism. Hell is typically described as a place of eternal punishment for those who have lived sinful lives, rejected God, or failed to adhere to certain moral codes. The problem of hell poses a significant challenge to the belief in an all-good, all-powerful, and all-loving God. If such a God exists, how could he allow a place of eternal torment and suffering to exist, where individuals are subjected to endless pain for actions or beliefs held during their finite lives? The very idea of hell raises profound ethical, philosophical, and theological questions about divine justice, mercy, and the nature of God. One of the most immediate concerns regarding hell is the apparent contradiction between the idea of an all-loving God and the existence of eternal punishment. Many religious traditions assert that God is loving, merciful, and forgiving, desiring the salvation of all souls. Yet the existence of hell, a place of unending suffering and torment, seems incompatible with these attributes. The idea that an infinitely loving God would create a system where individuals are eternally punished for temporal sins contradicts the very notion of love and mercy. If God is truly all-loving, why would he allow his creatures to suffer forever, especially when many of them may not have had a full understanding of the consequences of their actions or beliefs? Additionally, the concept of eternal punishment raises significant moral concerns. The idea that individuals can be eternally punished for finite actions, no matter how grave, seems disproportionate and unjust. Even the most severe earthly crimes, such as murder, theft, or betrayal, are met with finite punishments in human justice systems, with an emphasis on rehabilitation, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. In contrast, the punishment for sin in hell is portrayed as everlasting, with no hope of reprieve or restoration. This notion of eternal punishment appears to be a gross overreaction to the transgressions of finite beings, suggesting a system of divine justice that is not only harsh but also arbitrary and excessively punitive. Another problem with the doctrine of hell is the question of moral responsibility and the fairness of eternal punishment. Many people throughout history and in contemporary society have never had the opportunity to hear about or understand the religious teachings that lead to salvation, particularly in the context of specific religious faiths. For example, people who are born in regions where Christianity or Islam is not the dominant religion may never have been exposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ or the Quran. Does this mean that these individuals, through no fault of their own, will be condemned to eternal suffering for not accepting a belief system that was never made available to them? The idea that people can be punished eternally for failing to embrace a particular religion or worldview raises serious questions about the fairness and justice of such a system. If hell is a consequence of failing to accept a specific religious truth, then the vast majority of humanity throughout history, who have not had access to this truth, would be condemned to eternal torment, simply because they were born in the wrong place or at the wrong time. Moreover, the concept of hell becomes even more problematic when considering the moral development of individuals. Many people go through life without fully understanding the nature of good and evil, and some individuals are born into environments of extreme hardship, abuse, or ignorance, which can shape their understanding of morality. The idea that such individuals would be eternally punished for failing to meet certain moral standards, especially when those standards were never fully understood or internalized, is deeply troubling. A just and loving God would presumably take into account the context and circumstances of each individual's life, rather than punishing them eternally for mistakes made under difficult or confusing conditions. The concept of hell also creates a theological dilemma regarding God's omnipotence and omniscience. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, then he would be aware of the suffering in hell for all eternity. An omniscient being, knowing the depth and duration of the suffering, could not ignore the pain and torment of the damned. Yet if God is aware of the eternal suffering of the damned and has the power to intervene or end that suffering, it seems morally inconsistent for him to allow it to continue. The problem arises when considering the possibility that God, in his omniscience, would allow eternal suffering even if he could alleviate it. This suggests a lack of divine compassion and mercy, which seems incompatible with the nature of a loving and just God. The problem of hell also highlights the issue of free will and divine justice. Some theists argue that hell is a consequence of human free will, where individuals freely choose to reject God and embrace sin. In this view, God offers salvation to all, and those who refuse to accept it are justly condemned to hell. However, this raises the question of whether free will can truly justify eternal punishment. Human free will is exercised within the context of limited knowledge, understanding, and circumstances. The ability to freely choose between good and evil is not always clear-cut, and many individuals are raised in environments that shape their worldview and moral decisions in ways that are outside their control. For example, an individual raised in a family or society where religious teachings are absent, or where negative behaviors are normalized, may not fully understand the consequences of their actions. In such cases, the free will argument seems insufficient to justify eternal damnation, as individuals may not have had the full freedom to make informed and rational choices. Furthermore, the existence of hell raises the issue of whether eternal punishment is truly consistent with the concept of personal growth or transformation. If individuals are eternally punished in hell for their actions or beliefs, there is no opportunity for change, repentance, or redemption. The doctrine of hell, in its traditional sense, denies the possibility of transformation or spiritual progress for those who are condemned. This is in stark contrast to the idea that people can learn from their mistakes, grow morally, and seek forgiveness. The finality of hell suggests that no matter what an individual does or believes during their life, their fate is sealed in eternity, leaving no room for hope or improvement. A just and loving God would presumably allow for the possibility of growth, change, and redemption, rather than consigning individuals to eternal punishment without any hope of escape. Finally, the concept of hell raises questions about the nature of divine justice itself. The idea that an infinite eternal punishment is the appropriate response to finite temporal sins appears disproportionate and incompatible with our sense of justice. In human societies, punishment is typically seen as a means of rehabilitation or deterrence, and it is always finite in nature, corresponding to the severity of the crime committed. The idea that individuals who commit sins during their brief lives are subject to infinite punishment seems to contradict our intuitions about justice. If God is truly just, then his justice should align with a moral framework that is consistent with human notions of fairness and proportionality. Eternal punishment, by contrast, seems to be an extreme and unjust punishment that fails to meet these standards. In conclusion, the problem of hell presents a significant challenge to the belief in an all-powerful, all-loving, and all-good God. The existence of eternal punishment appears to be incompatible with the nature of divine love, justice, and mercy. The idea that individuals are condemned to eternal suffering for finite actions, under conditions that may not be fully understood or voluntarily chosen, raises serious ethical and philosophical questions. The concept of hell also presents theological difficulties regarding free will, divine justice, and the possibility of personal growth. Ultimately, the problem of hell casts doubt on the plausibility of a God who would allow such a place of eternal torment to exist. The cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is one of the oldest and most widely discussed arguments for the existence of God. It is based on the idea that the universe must have had a cause or explanation for its existence, and that cause is God. The central claim of this argument is that the universe cannot be the result of an infinite regress of causes, but must have had an initial, uncaused cause, one that is necessary and eternal. The cosmological argument begins with the principle of sufficient reason, which states that everything must have an explanation for its existence or occurrence. The principle asserts that nothing can exist without a reason for its being, and that every effect must have a cause. This principle is foundational to many philosophical inquiries, and it is often used as a starting point for the cosmological argument. For example, if you look at any object in the universe, whether it be a rock, a star, or a human being, you can ask why it exists. According to the principle of sufficient reason, each of these objects must have an explanation. The rock's existence is due to certain causes, the conditions of the earth, the laws of physics, and so on. But these causes in turn must have explanations of their own. The chain of explanations in this view cannot extend infinitely backward. The central claim of the cosmological argument is that there must be a first cause, a starting point for the chain of causes that explains the existence of the universe. This first cause cannot itself be caused by anything else, or we would again face an infinite regress, which would leave the universe's existence unexplained. A key proponent of this idea was Aristotle, who argued that there must be a prime mover, a being or force that initiated the chain of causes, but is itself unmoved and uncaused. For Aristotle, this prime mover was necessary to explain the motion and changes we see in the universe. This is closely related to the concept of God in many religious traditions, who is believed to be the uncaused cause of all things. Aquinas, one of the most famous medieval Christian philosophers, formulated his own version of the cosmological argument in his 5 ways to prove the existence of God. The first of these ways is the argument from motion, which is a variant of the cosmological argument. Aquinas argued that everything in motion must have been set in motion by something else. But since there cannot be an infinite regress of movers, there must be a first unmoved mover, which he identified with God. Aquinas also offered several other ways to argue for the existence of God, each of which depends on the notion that the universe is contingent. Its existence and its order are not necessary and cannot explain themselves. According to Aquinas, the fact that the universe exists at all suggests the need for a necessary being to account for its existence. Another approach to the cosmological argument is based on the idea of contingency. In this version of the argument, proponents claim that everything in the universe is contingent. That is, everything could have failed to exist or could cease to exist. Nothing in the universe exists necessarily. If everything is contingent, then there must be something that exists necessarily, something that must exist and cannot fail to exist. This necessary being is usually identified as God. For instance, if you consider any particular object in the universe, like a tree or a planet, it could have failed to exist. It depends on a series of causes and conditions to exist. But the universe as a whole cannot depend on contingent things forever. There must be a necessary being that accounts for the existence of all contingent things. This necessary being is what is argued to be God. A more recent formulation of the cosmological argument is the column cosmological argument, which was popularized by philosopher William Lane Craig. This version of the argument focuses on the origin of the universe itself, rather than just its causes. The column argument asserts that the universe had a beginning, that it began to exist at some point in time, and that anything that begins to exist must have a cause. Craig's argument draws heavily on contemporary cosmological findings, such as the Big Bang theory, which suggests that the universe had a definite beginning. The fact that the universe had a beginning means it is not eternal, and therefore it must have had a cause. The cause of the universe, according to the column argument, must be timeless, spaceless and immaterial, traits traditionally attributed to God. The cosmological argument is often tied to the idea of fine-tuning, the observation that the constants and laws of physics in the universe appear to be finely tuned to support life. If any of these constants were altered even slightly, life as we know it would be impossible. This precise balance of physical constants is often seen as evidence of design, and many proponents of the cosmological argument argue that the fine-tuning of the universe points to the existence of a purposeful designer, God. For instance, the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, the weak and strong nuclear forces, and the masses of subatomic particles are all precisely tuned to allow for the existence of stars, planets, and ultimately life. The improbability of such precise conditions arising by chance is often cited as evidence of a higher cause, a cause that is purposeful and intelligent. While the cosmological argument is compelling to many, it is not without its critics. One major objection is the problem of infinite regress. Critics argue that if the universe must have a first cause, then why must God be exempt from needing a cause? Why can't God be a part of the infinite regress just like everything else? If everything requires a cause, then the existence of an uncaused God seems arbitrary. Additionally, skeptics often ask why the first cause must be God. Why not some other explanation? Some propose the idea of a multiverse, an infinite series of universes, some of which are capable of supporting life. In this view, the universe we observe is simply one of many that arose through random processes, eliminating the need for a supernatural cause. Despite criticisms, the cosmological argument remains one of the strongest and most enduring arguments for the existence of God. Whether through the principle of sufficient reason, the idea of contingency, or the more recent column cosmological argument, the notion that the universe requires a cause is intuitively appealing. The claim that there must be an uncaused necessary being to account for the existence of the universe continues to resonate with many philosophers, theologians and believers. The argument also links well with the observation of fine-tuning in the universe, the existence of objective laws of nature, and the existence of order and structure in the cosmos. While there are challenges and objections to the cosmological argument, its central claim that the universe requires an explanation remains a powerful justification for the belief in God as the first cause. The argument from the unlikeliness of a creator. One of the fundamental challenges to the belief in a divine creator is the sheer improbability of such a being existing in the first place. The universe, with its vast scale, complexity, and seemingly random nature, presents a significant problem for theistic beliefs. The argument from the unlikeliness of a creator questions the plausibility of a purposeful, intelligent being existing as the source of all creation, given the apparent randomness and natural processes that govern the universe. The first part of this argument focuses on the statistical improbability of a creator existing in the way religious traditions describe. The idea that an intelligent personal God who is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent would exist, intervene in the world, and create life is not only unsupported by evidence, but also highly improbable based on the natural laws and the sheer scale of the universe. Given the vastness of space, with billions of galaxies, stars, and planets, it seems statistically improbable that a singular personal creator would be concerned with a relatively small planet like Earth in an insignificant corner of the universe. This improbability is compounded by the complexity of life. While many theists argue that the complexity and diversity of life point to a designer, skeptics suggest that complexity can arise from natural processes like evolution. The argument here is that the emergence of life through naturalistic processes is far more probable than the existence of a purposeful creator who actively shapes and sustains life. From a purely statistical standpoint, the likelihood of a creator being responsible for life on Earth, when compared to the likelihood of life evolving through natural processes, seems much smaller. Additionally, the argument from the unlikeliness of a creator challenges the idea that the universe itself needs a designer. The universe operates according to natural laws that have been described by physics, chemistry, and biology. These laws explain how matter and energy behave, and how complex systems emerge from simpler ones over time. In this view, the existence of the universe does not require a creator, because the laws of nature themselves can account for the origins of the cosmos. From this perspective, the existence of a divine creator is not only unnecessary but also highly unlikely, given that the universe can be explained through naturalistic causes. The improbability of a creator is further emphasized by the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe. Many believers point to the apparent fine-tuning of the universe as evidence for a designer. They argue that the conditions required for life, such as the specific values of physical constants, the force of gravity, and the nature of matter, seem perfectly suited to support life. However, skeptics counter that fine-tuning is a result of the anthropic principle, which suggests that we observe the universe in the way that we do because only in such a universe could life arise. The argument suggests that the apparent fine-tuning of the universe is not evidence of design, but rather a consequence of our existence in a universe that is hospitable to life. Given the vast number of planets and galaxies in the universe, it is not surprising that at least one such planet would have the right conditions for life to develop. Moreover, the argument points to the concept of multiple universes, or the multiverse. The multiverse hypothesis suggests that there are an infinite number of universes, each with different physical constants and laws. If this is the case, then it is not unlikely that at least one universe, ours, would have the conditions necessary for life. In this context, the existence of a universe that supports life is not an improbable event, but rather an inevitable consequence of the existence of many different universes. The idea of a multiverse, while still speculative, undermines the need for a divine creator to explain the fine-tuning of the universe, as it offers a naturalistic explanation for the existence of a life-friendly universe. The improbability of a creator also stems from the lack of empirical evidence for such an entity. Throughout history, believers have pointed to various signs and experiences such as miracles, religious texts, and personal revelations as evidence for the existence of a creator. However, these claims are often anecdotal and lack the rigorous evidence required to substantiate the existence of a divine being. The absence of direct empirical evidence for a creator makes the hypothesis of a divine being seem even more unlikely. In contrast, naturalistic explanations for the origins of the universe and life, grounded in the laws of physics and biology, are supported by a growing body of evidence and continue to provide a coherent framework for understanding the cosmos. The argument from the unlikeliness of a creator also raises the question of why such a creator would exist in the first place. If the universe can operate according to natural laws and processes, without the need for divine intervention, then the existence of a creator seems unnecessary. Furthermore, if the universe is the result of a divine plan, it raises the question of why such a plan would involve the creation of a vast, seemingly indifferent universe, filled with suffering, chaos, and natural disasters. The existence of evil and suffering in the world challenges the idea of a benevolent and purposeful creator, further diminishing the likelihood of such a being existing. Finally, the argument from the unlikeliness of a creator suggests that the concept of a divine being is an artifact of human psychology and culture. Humans have a natural tendency to seek patterns and explanations for the world around them, and throughout history, the idea of a creator has served to explain the origins of life, the universe, and moral order. However, the argument posits that the belief in a creator is not based on objective evidence, but rather on cultural conditioning and psychological needs. The existence of a creator, therefore, may be far less likely than the existence of natural impersonal forces that govern the universe. In conclusion, the argument from the unlikeliness of a creator suggests that the existence of a divine being is statistically improbable and unnecessary, given the naturalistic explanations for the origins and workings of the universe. The vastness of the cosmos, the complexity of life, and the apparent randomness of the universe all point to the conclusion that a creator is not required to explain the universe and its contents. As science continues to uncover naturalistic explanations for the phenomena that once seemed mysterious and inexplicable, the likelihood of a divine creator diminishes, making the idea of a purposeful, intelligent designer increasingly unlikely. The ontological argument. The ontological argument is a unique and highly abstract philosophical argument for the existence of God. Unlike other arguments that rely on empirical evidence or observations of the natural world, the ontological argument is based purely on reason and the concept of God itself. It asserts that the very idea of God implies his existence, and that it is logically impossible for God not to exist. The ontological argument is often associated with the philosopher Anselm of Canterbury, though many other thinkers have developed and refined it over the centuries. The ontological argument begins with the definition of God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. In other words, God is the greatest possible being that can be imagined. The central idea of the argument is that if such a being can be conceived in the mind, it must exist in reality. This is because, according to the argument, a being that exists in reality is greater than a being that exists only in the mind. If God only existed in the mind, he would not be the greatest possible being, because a being that exists both in the mind and in reality would be greater. Therefore, if God can be conceived as the greatest possible being, he must exist in reality. The ontological argument plays on the idea that existence is a property of greatness. For instance, if you were to imagine the greatest possible being, it would have all the perfections, such as omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. One of the key perfections that would be required for a being to be the greatest possible being is existence itself. A God that does not exist would be lacking in the very essence of what it means to be the greatest being. Hence, God must exist in reality, because the concept of a greatest possible being necessarily entails that being's existence. The argument is often formulated in a syllogistic manner. One of the classic formulations of the ontological argument comes from René Descartes, who asserted that the idea of God is of a perfect being. Since perfection involves existence, because non-existence would be an imperfection, Descartes concluded that God must exist. For Descartes, the very idea of God's perfection necessitated his existence in reality. Similarly, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz argued that existence is a necessary component of perfection. He suggested that the concept of God involves all perfections, and therefore God must exist to possess all of them fully. The ontological argument has undergone several reformulations over time. One notable version is Alvin Plantinga's modal ontological argument, which uses the concepts of possible worlds and necessity to argue for God's existence. According to this formulation, it is possible that a being like God exists in some possible world. If God exists in any possible world, he must exist in all possible worlds, because the concept of God involves necessary existence. The argument asserts that the existence of a maximally great being in one possible world implies its existence in every possible world, including the actual world. Therefore, if it is possible for God to exist, he must exist in the actual world. Despite the appeal of the ontological argument to some, it has faced significant criticism. One of the most famous objections was raised by the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argued that existence is not a predicate or a property. In his view, when we define a being as existing, we are not adding anything to the concept of that being, we are merely stating that the being is real. Therefore, according to Kant, the ontological argument is flawed because it treats existence as a property that a being can possess, rather than simply a state of being. For Kant, saying that God is the greatest possible being and therefore must exist, is logically invalid, because existence does not add anything to the concept of greatness. Another significant objection to the ontological argument comes from the philosopher Gonilo of Marmotaries, who proposed a counter-example known as Gonilo's perfect island. Gonilo argued that one could apply the same reasoning used in the ontological argument to something other than God, such as a perfect island. If the ontological argument works for God, it should also work for an island that is the greatest possible island. However, Gonilo pointed out that the idea of such an island does not imply that it exists in reality. This objection highlights a potential flaw in the ontological argument. It seems to apply a form of reasoning that can lead to absurd conclusions. Additionally, David Hume and Immanuel Kant also criticized the idea of trying to prove the existence of something through reason alone. Hume argued that knowledge about existence must be based on empirical evidence. We must observe things in the world to know that they exist. According to Hume, existence is not something we can infer simply by analyzing concepts. Instead, we must rely on experience and observation to learn about the world and its inhabitants. Despite these criticisms, many philosophers continue to find the ontological argument intriguing. Some argue that the objections raised against the argument are either misunderstandings or misunderstandings of the logic involved. For instance, supporters of the argument assert that God's necessary existence is a different type of existence than the existence of contingent beings, like islands or trees. The ontological argument is thus not an argument that proves the existence of any being, but rather a specific type of being, a necessary being whose existence is a logical necessity, rather than a contingent fact. Furthermore, proponents of the ontological argument claim that the argument is an intellectual exercise in understanding the nature of existence, and the concept of God. Even if it does not provide empirical evidence of God's existence, the argument forces us to engage with important concepts like existence, perfection, and the nature of God. It can also serve to reinforce the idea that the idea of God is meaningful and can lead to a deeper understanding of divinity. In conclusion, the ontological argument is a unique and intellectually stimulating argument for the existence of God. It is rooted in the concept of God as the greatest possible being, and it asserts that such a being must exist because existence is a necessary perfection for the greatest possible being. Despite various objections, such as Kant's critique of existence as a predicate and Gonilo's perfect island analogy, the ontological argument continues to be a subject of philosophical debate. Whether or not it ultimately proves God's existence, it remains a thought-provoking exploration of the nature of existence and the concept of God. The problem of evil. The problem of evil presents a significant challenge to the belief in an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God. If God is truly all-powerful, he should be able to prevent suffering. If he is all-knowing, he would be aware of all suffering that takes place in the world. And if he is all-good, he would desire to prevent that suffering, because an all-good being would not allow unnecessary pain and harm. However, suffering does exist, and in many cases, it is extreme, prolonged, and seemingly pointless. This contradiction creates a fundamental issue with the belief in a deity that embodies these three attributes simultaneously. The problem becomes even more complex when we divide suffering into two types: moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil refers to suffering that results from human actions. This includes war, murder, theft, torture, and a range of other harmful acts that human beings inflict upon one another. The question here is simple. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does he allow human beings to commit such atrocities? Why does he allow people to hurt and harm each other, often causing irreparable damage to lives, families, and entire societies? The existence of moral evil seems to call into question the goodness or power of God. After all, if God could stop these evils and chose not to, then that would suggest either a lack of power or a lack of goodness on his part. Natural evil, on the other hand, refers to suffering caused by natural phenomena like earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, disease, and death due to natural causes. These events cause immense suffering, loss of life, and destruction, but unlike moral evil, they are not caused by human actions. Natural disasters don't care about the innocent or the guilty. They affect everyone. Why would an omnipotent and omnibenevolent God allow the innocent to suffer in such a way? Why would he allow the deaths of children, the suffering of the elderly, or the pain of those who have done nothing wrong? The existence of natural evil seems to contradict the idea of a loving and all-powerful God, because these events appear to be random, senseless, and without any purpose that justifies the suffering they cause. Many theists have attempted to explain or defend the existence of evil in the world through various theodicies, or justifications for why a benevolent and all-powerful God might allow evil and suffering to persist. The most common defense is the free will defense. According to this view, God gave human beings free will, and the existence of evil is a direct consequence of this freedom. The argument goes that for love, goodness, and virtue to be meaningful, they must be chosen freely. If God intervened every time someone made a bad choice, then free will would be nullified. But this explanation only addresses moral evil, not natural evil. If natural disasters and diseases are part of God's plan, then free will is irrelevant in these cases. Why would an all-good God allow natural suffering when there is no human choice involved? The soul-making theodicy offers another explanation. This theory suggests that suffering is necessary for spiritual growth and the development of virtues such as courage, empathy, and patience. The idea is that through hardship, individuals can grow morally and spiritually. Without suffering, it is argued people would not have the opportunity to develop these virtues. However, this explanation has its own set of problems. First, it raises the question of why excessive suffering is required for moral growth. For instance, is it really necessary for millions of people to suffer through horrific tragedies, just so that others can learn patience or compassion? The sheer scale and intensity of suffering in the world, especially in the case of children and innocent people, seems disproportionate to any potential spiritual benefit. Additionally, many forms of suffering, such as the suffering caused by disease or natural disasters, seem pointless in the context of moral or spiritual growth. It is difficult to see how such suffering could lead to positive outcomes. Another common theodicy is the best possible world defense. This argument suggests that God created the best of all possible worlds, and the existence of evil is a necessary component of this greater good. According to this view, the world with all of its flaws and suffering is the best possible version that could have been created. The existence of evil, in this context, is not evidence of a deficient or malevolent God, but rather a sign that God's creation is the most optimal for a greater purpose. The world in its imperfection offers opportunities for moral and spiritual growth, which could not occur in a perfectly just or harmonious world. However, this explanation faces significant criticism. It is difficult to accept that the world could not have been created in a way that allowed for less suffering, while still providing opportunities for moral development. Why does the world have to be this bad in order to serve some greater good? The argument fails to account for the gratuitous suffering that occurs without any apparent purpose or benefit. For example, the suffering of an innocent child who dies from a preventable disease seems unnecessary and unjustifiable, regardless of the potential spiritual growth of others. The problem of hell is another aspect of the problem of evil. The existence of hell, as a place of eternal punishment, further complicates the argument. If God is all good and all loving, why would he allow people to be eternally punished for finite sins? The idea that a person could be condemned to eternal suffering for actions committed in a short lifetime seems disproportionate and incompatible with the idea of a loving and just God. The concept of hell introduces further tension between the existence of evil and the nature of God, as it suggests that divine punishment for wrongdoing is eternal and absolute, often without a chance for redemption or mercy. In conclusion, the problem of evil remains one of the most compelling arguments against the belief in an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God. The existence of gratuitous and pointless suffering, both moral and natural, challenges the idea that such a God could exist. The various theodicies offered by theists, while attempting to justify the existence of evil, fail to address the full scale and nature of suffering in the world. The continued presence of unnecessary pain and destruction in the world raises serious questions about the nature of God, and whether such a being can logically exist. The argument from the impossibility of God's non-existence asserts that God's existence is logically necessary, and that it is impossible for God not to exist. This argument draws from metaphysical reasoning, suggesting that the very concept of God is such that the existence of God is required for everything else to be coherent and intelligible. Proponents of this argument claim that, without God, reality, meaning and existence would collapse into absurdity. Therefore, God's existence is not only probable but absolutely necessary for the logical structure of the universe. One of the core concepts behind this argument is the ontological necessity of God. The idea is that God is a being whose existence cannot be denied without leading to contradictions or logical incoherence. The argument proposes that God by definition is a necessary being, a being whose existence is not contingent upon anything else but is instead required for any other existence to be possible. Without this necessary being, the existence of the universe or even the possibility of truth and logic would be fundamentally problematic. The principle of sufficient reason plays a central role in this argument. According to this principle, everything that exists must have a reason or explanation for why it is the way it is. If we trace back the chain of contingent causes, we must eventually arrive at an uncaused cause, something that exists by necessity and doesn't rely on anything else for its existence. For many theists, this uncaused cause is God. Without a necessary being at the foundation of reality, there would be no sufficient explanation for the existence of anything. The existence of the universe, life and laws of nature would be inexplicable and without reason. God as the necessary being is the ultimate explanation for the existence of anything. This argument is often linked with Anselm of Canterbury's ontological argument, which asserts that if we can conceive of a perfect all-powerful being, God, it is impossible for such a being not to exist. The very nature of God as the greatest conceivable being implies that he must exist. If God were merely a hypothetical or contingent being, he would not be perfect, as perfection would require necessary existence. Therefore, God's existence is a logical necessity, and his non-existence would contradict the very essence of the concept of God. Another important aspect of the argument is the coherence of existence. For proponents of this argument, the presence of laws of nature, mathematical structures and universal truths presupposes the existence of a being who is the ultimate ground of reality. The laws of logic themselves, for example, cannot be explained purely by physical processes or human minds. These abstract laws are immutable, timeless and universal, and the existence of such laws requires a mind or being that holds these laws in place, namely, God. A significant feature of the argument from the impossibility of God's non-existence is its metaphysical implications. It argues that God is not only the cause of the universe but is the fundamental reality upon which all contingent beings rely. Without God, nothing could rationally or logically exist, because everything in existence depends on the necessity of God's being. This includes not only physical entities like stars and planets, but also abstract concepts like numbers and moral values. Critics of the argument from the impossibility of God's non-existence often point out that the concept of necessary existence itself is contentious. They argue that it is unclear why anything including God must exist necessarily. Some philosophers propose that reality could exist in a contingent way, meaning that everything exists because of a chain of causes but that none of these causes necessarily had to exist. In this view, there is no need for a necessary being to explain reality. Additionally, some philosophers such as David Hume have questioned the validity of the principle of sufficient reason, suggesting that it is not an ironclad rule and could be broken. Nonetheless, proponents of the argument from the impossibility of God's non-existence argue that the possibility of a contingent universe raises more questions than it answers. If the universe were contingent, then it would require an infinite regress of causes or a being that exists by necessity to halt this regress. The existence of a necessary being, God, is the only way to avoid such an infinite regress and provide a sufficient explanation for the existence of the universe and all its contents. In conclusion, the argument from the impossibility of God's non-existence posits that the existence of God is logically necessary for the coherence of the universe and the possibility of truth and meaning. Without God, reality itself would be incoherent, as there would be no necessary foundation to account for the existence of anything. This argument maintains that God's non-existence is logically impossible because a necessary being is required to make sense of everything that exists. The very concept of God implies his existence, and without this necessary existence, the universe, logic and reality would collapse into absurdity. Next up we have the moral law argument, or the natural law argument. The moral law argument, also known as the natural law argument, asserts that the existence of objective moral laws and duties points to the existence of a moral lawgiver typically identified as God. The argument is based on the observation that there are certain moral principles that appear to be universally recognized. regardless of culture, time, or geography. These principles, such as the belief that murder is wrong or that individuals have intrinsic value, seem to be objective truths that exist independently of human opinion or preference. The existence of these objective moral laws, proponents argue, necessitates the existence of a divine being who has established and maintains these laws. One of the central ideas behind the moral law argument is that if objective morality exists, if there are moral facts that apply universally to all people, then there must be some kind of external source that grounds and upholds these moral truths. In other words, objective morality cannot be the product of human convention or cultural agreement, because moral truths are often discovered, not created. These moral laws do not depend on the subjective preferences of individuals or societies, rather, they seem to be universal and absolute, applying to all people at all times. Proponents of the argument often point out that without the existence of a moral lawgiver, the foundation of objective moral values would be unclear. If moral values were simply the result of biological evolution, cultural norms, or social conditioning, they would be relative and could vary from one culture or society to another. However, the widespread recognition of certain moral principles, such as the wrongness of stealing, killing, or lying, suggests that these values are not merely social constructs but objective moral facts that transcend human opinion. Moreover, the moral experience of individuals provides strong evidence for the existence of objective moral laws. Many people across all cultures have an inherent sense of right and wrong. This moral intuition or conscience seems to guide behavior and decision-making, even in the absence of legal or societal constraints. For example, people often feel guilt or remorse when they do something morally wrong, indicating that they recognize the objective nature of the moral law. If morality were purely subjective, these feelings would be meaningless, as there would be no inherent right or wrong in any given action. The moral law is often described as a set of rules or principles that govern human behavior, such as honesty, justice, and compassion. These laws do not merely guide human behavior in a utilitarian sense but reflect a deeper sense of human dignity and worth. The idea that every person has intrinsic value regardless of their social status or abilities is a foundational moral truth that cannot be easily explained by evolutionary biology or cultural norms. This belief in human equality and dignity points to the existence of a moral lawgiver who imbues human beings with value and meaning. A key aspect of the argument is the recognition that the existence of objective morality cannot be fully accounted for by naturalistic or atheistic worldviews. According to the atheistic perspective, moral values are typically understood as the product of social constructs, evolutionary pressures, or biological instincts. These explanations, however, fail to provide a foundational basis for why certain actions are objectively wrong, for example, murder, torture, or slavery. If moral values were merely the result of social or biological factors, then there would be no objective standard to measure right from wrong, and individuals or societies could justify any behavior as long as it aligned with their own values or interests. In contrast, the theistic perspective provides a more robust explanation for the existence of objective morality. According to this view, the moral law is grounded in the nature of God. God is the ultimate source of morality, and the moral principles that humans recognize are a reflection of His holy and just nature. These moral laws are not arbitrary but are based on the eternal and unchanging nature of God, making them objective and binding for all people. The belief in a moral lawgiver, God, provides a solid foundation for understanding why certain actions are inherently right or wrong, independent of human opinion or societal norms. Critics of the moral law argument often point to the fact that different cultures have different moral systems, which may suggest that morality is a cultural construct rather than an objective reality. For example, some cultures may condone practices that others consider immoral, such as polygamy, honor killings, or slavery. However, proponents of the argument argue that even though different cultures may have different moral practices, there are still certain core values that are universally recognized, such as the value of human life or the wrongness of murder. These shared moral principles suggest that there is an objective moral law that transcends cultural differences. Another criticism is that the argument assumes that objective morality requires a divine lawgiver, but it is possible to have moral principles that are objective without appealing to God. Some philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant, have argued that morality can be based on reason or the categorical imperative, which dictates that individuals should act according to principles that could be universally applied. According to this view, the existence of objective morality does not require a supernatural explanation, but rather can be derived from human rationality and the ability to recognize moral duties. Nonetheless, proponents of the moral law argument argue that the moral law goes beyond human reason and intuition. While reason and conscience may help individuals recognize moral duties, they do not explain why these duties exist in the first place. The existence of objective moral values such as justice, love, and compassion requires a transcendent source that is beyond human culture and reason. Theism provides a satisfactory explanation for these moral laws, grounding them in the nature of God. In conclusion, the moral law argument asserts that the existence of objective moral values and duties points to the existence of a divine moral lawgiver. The universal recognition of moral principles, the moral experience of individuals, and the inability of atheistic or naturalistic worldviews to adequately explain objective morality all suggest that God is the ultimate source of moral laws. These moral laws, grounded in God's eternal and unchanging nature, provide a firm foundation for understanding what is right and wrong, and give human beings a sense of purpose and direction in their moral lives. Divine hiddenness. The argument from divine hiddenness poses a critical challenge to the belief in an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God. This argument suggests that the existence of God cannot be reconciled with the apparent hiddenness or lack of clear evidence of God's presence in the world. If God exists and is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, it stands to reason that he would make his existence more evident to humanity, ensuring that all people have access to knowledge of his divine presence. The fact that many people throughout history and in the present day live without a clear and undeniable encounter with God raises significant questions about the nature of God and his desire for a relationship with human beings. One of the central premises of the argument from divine hiddenness is simple. If God is truly loving and desires to be known by his creation, he would not remain hidden or obscure. An all-good God would want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to know him and experience his love and presence. However, this is not what we observe. Throughout history, many people have lived and died without ever having experienced a clear revelation of God's existence or encountered him in a personal, undeniable way. The widespread hiddenness of God creates an environment where belief is not easily accessible to all, and the possibility of faith is complicated by doubt, confusion, and skepticism. Many people have tried to reconcile the hiddenness of God with the belief in a loving and all-powerful deity through various responses. One such response is the free will defense, which posits that God's hiddenness is necessary in order to preserve human freedom. According to this view, if God were to make his presence undeniable and his existence clearly known to all, then people would no longer have the freedom to choose whether to believe in him. Faith would become a matter of necessity rather than choice. The argument goes that a world in which belief is coerced by clear evidence would be one where human beings lose the ability to freely choose to follow God. If belief in God were forced upon people, it would no longer be genuine or meaningful. While this defense appeals to human freedom, it also raises several important questions. First, why must divine hiddenness be so extreme and pervasive in order to preserve human freedom? Would it not still be possible for God to reveal himself in such a way that people could choose to believe freely without being forced or coerced? The free will defense seems to imply that if God were to make his existence more clear and obvious, free will would be compromised. But is this the case? Many theists argue that God could reveal himself in ways that are compelling and persuasive without removing the freedom of choice. For instance, God could appear to each individual in a manner that is personally meaningful and appropriate, providing undeniable evidence of his presence without overwhelming their ability to choose whether to believe. The free will defense also fails to address the issue of widespread epistemic distance, or the gap between what could be known and what is known. If God desires a relationship with every person, why would he maintain such a significant gap in knowledge about his existence? The lack of clear evidence for God's existence leaves people in a state of uncertainty, doubt, and confusion. Many individuals who are genuinely seeking God have no access to the kind of evidence that would allow them to confidently believe in him. The widespread doubt about the existence of God, coupled with the existence of other religions and competing belief systems, suggests that God has intentionally maintained an epistemic distance that makes it difficult for people to know him. If God's goal is for all people to believe in him and be saved, then why would he allow so much confusion and doubt to persist? Another response to the argument from divine hiddenness is the soul-making theodicy, which suggests that God's hiddenness serves a purpose in the spiritual development of human beings. According to this view, the experience of doubt, uncertainty, and the search for God is a necessary part of spiritual growth. Just as physical strength is developed through challenges and adversity, spiritual strength is developed through the struggle of seeking God. The idea is that people's search for God, despite his hiddenness, helps them to grow in faith, perseverance, and other virtues. These virtues are considered essential for moral and spiritual maturity, and they can only be developed through the process of grappling with doubt and uncertainty. While the soul-making theodicy offers a compelling view, it still faces significant challenges. First, how much hiddenness is necessary for the development of virtues like faith and perseverance? Does divine hiddenness have to be so extreme in order for people to develop spiritually? It seems unreasonable to claim that an all-loving God would allow such an intense degree of uncertainty and doubt in the world in order to help people develop virtue. The idea that suffering and spiritual darkness are required for moral and spiritual growth seems problematic when considering the vast number of people who live their entire lives without any clear exposure to religious teachings or the opportunity to search for God. For those who never even hear of God or have no access to religious traditions, the idea that divine hiddenness is meant to develop their spiritual strength appears questionable. Additionally, the hiddenness of God raises the question of gratuitous suffering. If God is truly all-loving and all-powerful, why would he allow so many individuals to live and die without ever experiencing a clear revelation of his existence? Many people live in parts of the world where religious teachings are either absent or where the dominant religious beliefs are not centered on the concept of the God of classical theism. If divine hiddenness serves a purpose in the spiritual development of individuals, it's difficult to understand why millions of people have been born and raised without the opportunity to experience a direct encounter with God. If God desires a relationship with all people, why does he allow so many to live and die without ever knowing him in any meaningful way? The issue of epistemic distance comes into play here as well. If God desires a relationship with every individual, why does he allow so many to live in a state of spiritual ignorance? The idea of epistemic distance, where people are left in the dark about God's existence, suggests that God does not want to make himself clearly known. If God's goal is for everyone to know him and come into a personal relationship with him, then the degree of hiddenness in the world seems excessive. Why would an all-powerful God allow so many to remain in a state of doubt, confusion, and disbelief, when he could provide more direct and compelling evidence of his existence? In conclusion, the argument from divine hiddenness presents a significant challenge to the traditional understanding of God as omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. The lack of clear, undeniable evidence for God's existence creates an environment of doubt, skepticism, and confusion, which seems incompatible with the idea of a loving and all-powerful God who desires to be known by all people. The various responses to this argument, such as the free will defense and the soul-making theodicy, attempt to explain why God remains hidden, but they fail to address the full scope of the problem. The existence of so much doubt, disbelief, and confusion in the world raises important questions about the nature of God and his relationship to humanity. If God truly desires a relationship with every person, it is difficult to understand why he would remain hidden and allow so much uncertainty to persist. The teleological argument. The teleological argument, also known as the argument from design, is based on the observation that the universe displays an incredible degree of order, complexity, and purpose. This complexity appears to be purposeful, suggesting that the universe was designed by an intelligent creator. The argument asserts that just as a watch, with all its intricate parts and precision, implies the existence of a watchmaker, the universe, with all its finely tuned laws and intricacies, implies the existence of a designer God. One of the key aspects of the teleological argument is the observation of fine-tuning in the universe. Many constants in physics, such as the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the mass of subatomic particles, are set within incredibly narrow ranges. If any of these constants were altered even slightly, life as we know it would be impossible. The fact that the universe operates within these fine margins suggests that it could not have arisen by chance. For example, if the strength of gravity were only slightly weaker, stars could not form, and without stars, planets could not exist. On the other hand, if gravity were slightly stronger, stars would burn out too quickly for life to develop. The electromagnetic force, which governs how atoms and molecules interact, must also be precisely calibrated. A slight change in this force would prevent the formation of stable atoms, thus making the emergence of complex life impossible. The precise values of these constants lead many to argue that the universe appears to be designed with a specific purpose in mind, namely the existence of life. This idea of fine-tuning is further supported by the anthropic principle, which suggests that the conditions of the universe appear to be specifically tailored to allow for life. If any one of the fundamental physical constants were different, life as we know it would not exist. The fact that these constants happen to be exactly what is needed for life to emerge is considered by many to be evidence of design. According to this view, the universe seems to be set up for the existence of intelligent beings, which many see as an indication of a purposeful creator. The complexity of biological life also supports the teleological argument. The structures and processes found within living organisms are highly intricate and often appear to be purposeful. For instance, the DNA molecule, which carries the genetic information for all living things, is an incredibly complex structure. It contains vast amounts of information, organized in a way that allows organisms to reproduce and evolve. The specific way in which DNA works, along with the other cellular mechanisms in organisms, seems to suggest a level of design beyond what could be expected from random natural processes. The teleological argument also points to the laws of nature that govern the universe. These laws are not only precise but also universal. They apply everywhere at all times, and in every place. The consistency of these laws allows us to make predictions and develop scientific theories. The fact that the universe operates according to stable and predictable laws, rather than chaos or randomness, suggests that these laws were put in place by an intelligent force. Critics of the teleological argument often invoke the theory of evolution to explain the apparent design in biological life. According to Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, complex life forms can arise through gradual changes over time, with advantageous traits being preserved because they increase the likelihood of survival and reproduction. From this perspective, the complexity of life is not the result of design, but rather a natural undirected process that works through random mutations and selective pressures. Over time, these small changes accumulate, leading to the development of more complex organisms. While the theory of evolution does explain the diversity of life, it does not necessarily account for the fine-tuning of the universe itself, or the intricate design of the laws of physics. The argument from evolution is more concerned with explaining the development of life once the universe is already in place. The teleological argument, however, asks why the universe is set up in such a way that life could exist in the first place. Another criticism of the teleological argument comes from the concept of the multiverse. The multiverse hypothesis suggests that there may be an infinite number of universes, each with its own set of physical constants. In this scenario, it is possible that we simply live in one of the universes, where the physical constants happen to be just right for life. If there are enough universes, then it would not be surprising that one of them would support life. The multiverse theory offers a potential naturalistic explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe, without needing to invoke a designer. However, even if the multiverse theory is correct, it still leaves the question of why the multiverse itself exists in the first place. What accounts for the existence of the multiverse, and the laws that govern it? The teleological argument would still ask, why does any of this exist in such a way that life is possible? The multiverse does not fully resolve the question of why the universe is fine-tuned for life. Additionally, the problem of natural evil is often raised against the teleological argument. If the universe is designed by an intelligent and benevolent creator, why does it contain so much suffering, disease, and natural disasters? Earthquakes, tsunamis and other natural calamities can cause immense harm to living beings, and this appears inconsistent with the idea of a benevolent designer. The presence of suffering and evil in the world has led some to argue that if a designer exists, their nature might not be as benevolent as traditionally thought. Despite these criticisms, the teleological argument continues to be a powerful argument for the existence of God. The fine-tuning of the universe, the complexity of life, and the regularity of the laws of nature suggest that the universe may be the product of intelligent design. While naturalistic explanations like evolution and the multiverse offer alternative views, they do not fully address the underlying question of why the universe exists with such precise conditions in the first place. In conclusion, the teleological argument holds that the universe's order, complexity, and fine-tuning are best explained by the existence of a purposeful designer. The incredible precision of the physical constants and the intricate nature of biological life seem to point to a creator who set the universe in motion with the intention of supporting life. While there are objections to this argument, such as the evolutionary explanation for the complexity of life and the multiverse hypothesis, the teleological argument remains a compelling case for the belief in a divine creator. The non-necessity of a creator. One of the central questions in the philosophy of religion, and the debate over the existence of God, is whether the universe requires a creator to explain its existence and functioning. The argument from the non-necessity of a creator suggests that the universe and its complexities can be explained through natural processes, laws, and scientific principles, without the need for a divine being to have initiated or sustained it. In this view, the existence of the universe, life, and the laws of nature can be accounted for by the principles of physics, biology, and cosmology, without invoking a supernatural creator or intelligent designer. The concept of a creator, in many religious traditions, assumes that there must be some external force or being responsible for the origin of the universe. However, modern science, particularly in the fields of cosmology and physics, has offered naturalistic explanations for the origins and development of the universe. The Big Bang theory, for example, proposes that the universe began from an extremely hot and dense singularity approximately 13.8 billion years ago, and has been expanding ever since. This theory, along with the discovery of cosmic background radiation and the observed redshift of distant galaxies, provides strong empirical evidence for the natural processes that led to the formation of the universe. While the Big Bang theory does not explain the ultimate cause of the universe's existence, this remains a subject of speculation. It does provide a comprehensive account of how the universe came to be as it is without invoking a creator or divine intervention. In addition to the Big Bang theory, the laws of physics, such as the laws of thermodynamics and quantum mechanics, provide a detailed and coherent framework for understanding how the universe operates. These laws describe the behavior of matter and energy, the forces of nature, and the interactions between particles, all of which can be observed and tested through scientific experimentation. The idea that the universe operates according to natural laws, rather than the will of a supernatural being, has led many scientists and philosophers to conclude that a creator is not necessary to explain the universe's existence. Instead, the universe can be understood as a self-contained system governed by laws that operate independently of any external divine influence. The theory of evolution, formulated by Charles Darwin and supported by a wealth of evidence from genetics, paleontology, and biology, further challenges the need for a creator. Evolution by natural selection provides a comprehensive explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. According to this theory, life evolved over billions of years through the gradual accumulation of small genetic changes, with advantageous traits being passed down to subsequent generations. This process of natural selection operates without the need for an intelligent designer, as the environment selects which traits are advantageous for survival. The complexity and adaptability of life can thus be explained through purely naturalistic processes, without the need to invoke a divine being who created and designed life. The argument from the non-necessity of a creator also draws on the principle of parsimony or Occam's razor, which states that when faced with competing explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation, one that makes the fewest assumptions, is generally the most likely to be correct. From this perspective, positing the existence of a creator adds an unnecessary layer of complexity to our understanding of the universe. Instead of assuming that a supernatural being is responsible for the universe's existence, a naturalistic explanation, based on empirical evidence and the laws of nature, is sufficient to account for the origins and functioning of the cosmos. The existence of a creator introduces an additional unverified entity, which does not add explanatory power and complicates the overall understanding of the universe. Philosophical arguments against the necessity of a creator also emphasize the possibility of the universe existing without a creator. Some argue that the universe could be self-sustaining, or that it could have existed eternally without a beginning or end. The idea of a self-contained eternal universe is not incompatible with current scientific theories, particularly the concept of a multiverse, which suggests that our universe could be one of many in a vast, possibly infinite, multiverse. If the multiverse theory holds any validity, then the idea of a creator becomes superfluous, as the existence of multiple universes could be the result of natural processes, without the need for an intelligent designer. The notion that the universe is contingent upon the will of a creator is thus called into question, as it is possible that the universe, or even a multitude of universes, could have come into being and continued to exist through natural processes alone. One of the most compelling challenges to the necessity of a creator comes from the question of why a creator would be needed in the first place. If a creator is said to be the cause of the universe, the logical question that follows is what caused the creator. The idea of an uncaused cause, often used in theistic arguments, is problematic because it raises the issue of why the creator is exempt from the same laws of causality that apply to everything else in the universe. If the universe requires a cause, then why does the creator not require one? This line of reasoning leads to the idea that the concept of a creator is a metaphysical assumption that does not necessarily follow from the evidence available. Instead, it is possible that the universe, or the laws governing it, are self-existent and do not require a cause outside of themselves. The problem of the non-necessity of a creator also extends to the question of why a creator would have a particular nature or purpose. Many religious arguments for the existence of a creator suggest that God created the universe for a specific reason, often related to the existence of life, the moral development of human beings, or the fulfillment of some divine plan. However, this teleological argument, suggesting that the universe is designed with a particular purpose, becomes unnecessary if the universe can be explained through natural processes. The idea that the universe was created for a specific purpose, especially a purpose related to human life or morality, is difficult to defend if we can show that the universe and life can arise through impersonal, natural processes that do not require intentionality or design. If the universe operates according to natural laws, without the need for a divine being to guide or direct its development, then the idea of a purposeful creator becomes superfluous. In conclusion, the argument from the non-necessity of a creator presents a powerful challenge to the traditional theistic conception of God. Modern scientific theories, such as the Big Bang Theory, evolution, and the laws of physics, provide naturalistic explanations for the origins and functioning of the universe and life, without the need for a divine creator. The principle of parsimony suggests that invoking a creator unnecessarily complicates our understanding of the universe, and philosophical arguments against the necessity of a creator emphasize the possibility of a self-sustaining or eternal universe. Ultimately, the idea of a creator is not necessary to explain the cosmos, and the natural world offers a coherent, self-contained explanation for the universe's existence. The argument from the persistence of belief. The argument from the persistence of belief suggests that the enduring belief in God, despite centuries of intellectual, philosophical, and scientific challenges, serves as evidence for the truth of that belief. The argument posits that the widespread and enduring nature of religious belief across cultures and history points to a fundamental truth underlying these beliefs. According to proponents of this argument, the fact that belief in God has persisted for thousands of years across civilizations and despite the rise of secularism, atheism, and skepticism, suggests that there is something real at the heart of these beliefs, and that the human inclination to believe in God is not merely a cultural or psychological construct. At the core of the argument is the observation that people across the world have consistently believed in some form of higher power, even in the face of adversity, persecution, and contrary worldviews. From ancient civilizations to modern times, belief in gods, deities, or a singular divine being has been a universal human trait. This is not just a phenomenon limited to one culture or geographic area, but a consistent thread throughout human history. Even with the advancement of science and the rise of materialistic philosophies, belief in God has remained resilient and continues to be a central feature of human existence. Proponents of the argument from the persistence of belief suggest that this widespread and enduring belief is difficult to explain by purely naturalistic or psychological means. While there are many theories as to why humans believe in gods or a higher power, ranging from psychological comfort to social cohesion, the persistence of belief in God across different cultures and historical periods suggests that there may be something more to it. The argument asserts that the consistent human inclination to seek and acknowledge a divine being cannot easily be reduced to social conditioning, fear of death, or the need for moral structure. One aspect of the argument is the transcendent nature of the belief. Across cultures, people are not just seeking a deity who provides temporal benefits, but one that offers ultimate meaning, purpose, and understanding of the universe. The existence of deities in various forms throughout history, whether as gods of nature, gods of war, or a singular God who transcends all, suggests that humans have a deep-rooted need to acknowledge a divine source of existence and meaning. This need is not limited to any one time or place but spans the entire breadth of human history, from early tribal gods to modern monotheistic religions. A key aspect of the argument from the persistence of belief is that belief in God seems to fulfill a deep psychological need. Many psychologists have noted that humans seem to have an innate tendency to believe in a higher power or some form of spiritual reality. Some have argued that this is due to evolutionary pressures, that belief in the supernatural or in a higher power may have provided survival advantages by encouraging social cohesion or promoting moral behavior. However, proponents of the argument contend that these naturalistic explanations fail to fully account for the spiritual and transcendent aspects of belief. The depth of religious experience, particularly experiences of divine presence or revelation, seems to transcend a purely evolutionary explanation. Another important element of the argument is the fact that religious belief is not simply a cultural artifact but something that continues to evolve and take on new forms. Despite secularization in some parts of the world, belief in God continues to thrive, and new forms of spiritual belief arise to meet the challenges of modern existence. For instance, even in highly secular societies, interest in spirituality, mysticism and alternative forms of belief has persisted. This ongoing development and evolution of belief systems points to a universal human impulse that may indicate the presence of a deeper truth about the divine. Furthermore, the persistence of religious belief is not limited to historical periods of ignorance or superstition. In fact, many of the world's greatest philosophers, scientists and thinkers, including Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein and G.K. Chesterton, were deeply religious individuals who believed in God. Their belief was not a product of ignorance but rather a reflection of their profound intellectual and spiritual engagement with the mysteries of the universe. This suggests that belief in God can coexist with reason and science, and may even be a necessary part of the intellectual search for truth. In addition, the longevity of religious belief across time and space is significant. Many religious traditions, including Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other ancient traditions, have survived for thousands of years, adapting and thriving in the face of political, social, and philosophical changes. This resilience in the face of challenge further supports the idea that there is something intrinsically true about these beliefs. The continuity of these faiths, along with the billions of people throughout history who have adhered to them, suggests that belief in God is not just a passing trend or psychological aberration, but rather a reflection of a deep-seated and universal truth. Critics of the argument might point to the diversity of religious beliefs and claim that the persistence of belief simply reflects the cultural and psychological need for religion, rather than proof of God's existence. They may argue that just because people have always believed in God doesn't necessarily mean that God exists, any more than the persistence of belief in myths or superstitions can be taken as evidence of their truth. However, proponents of the argument counter that the enduring nature of belief in God, in its many forms, is distinct from the persistence of myths or folklore. Religious beliefs, they argue, are not just about explaining the world or providing comfort, they are about finding ultimate meaning and purpose in existence. In conclusion, the argument from the persistence of belief posits that the widespread and enduring belief in God throughout history and across cultures is a powerful indicator that there is something real and true at the heart of these beliefs. The persistence of religious belief, despite intellectual and scientific challenges, suggests that humans are not merely socially conditioned or psychologically predisposed to believe in God, but are drawn to the reality of a divine being. This universal and persistent human inclination to seek and acknowledge God points to the existence of a transcendent source of truth and meaning that has shaped human history and continues to resonate in the lives of billions today. The argument from inconsistent revelations. One of the primary challenges to the belief in a single, omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent God comes from the existence of inconsistent and contradictory religious revelations. Different religions claim to provide the true revelation from God, yet these revelations often differ significantly in their teachings, doctrines, and practices. This raises questions about the authenticity and reliability of these purported divine messages, and whether they can be reconciled with the existence of a single, all-powerful, and all-knowing deity. At the core of this argument is the observation that religious texts from different cultures often present vastly different conceptions of God, the afterlife, and the nature of the universe. For example, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, all present radically different views on the divine, the purpose of life, and the path to salvation. These religious traditions cannot all be true in their literal interpretations, as they make fundamentally conflicting claims about the nature of God and the cosmos. In Christianity, the belief in the Trinity, the idea that God exists as three persons in one being, is central to its theology. In contrast, Islam rejects the Trinity, emphasizing the absolute oneness of God, Tawhid. Hinduism, on the other hand, speaks of a multitude of gods and goddesses, with some interpretations focusing on an underlying impersonal divine force, Brahman. These differing conceptions of the divine not only contradict one another, but they also offer different paths to salvation. Christianity teaches that faith in Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation, while Islam emphasizes submission to the will of Allah, and Hinduism offers a variety of practices aimed at achieving moksha, or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. These conflicting religious claims raise important questions about the nature of divine revelation. If there is only one true God who is all-knowing and all-powerful, why would he reveal himself in such contradictory ways? Why would God allow his message to be distorted or misunderstood in ways that lead to conflicting interpretations of his will? The argument from inconsistent revelations suggests that the existence of such stark differences between religious teachings undermines the credibility of any one revelation, as being the definitive divinely inspired truth. The existence of multiple religious texts with contradictory messages further complicates the issue. The Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita and the Tripitaka, among others, all claim to be the revealed word of God or gods. Yet these texts often make incompatible statements about the nature of divinity, morality, and the afterlife. For example, the Bible teaches that salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, while the Quran teaches that salvation is attained through submission to the will of Allah, and adherence to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. These differing views on salvation cannot all be correct, and the disagreement between these texts raises doubts about the reliability of any particular religious revelation. The argument from inconsistent revelations also highlights the role of human interpretation in religious belief. Throughout history, religious texts have been translated, edited, and interpreted in various ways, leading to a multitude of different sects, denominations, and schools of thought within each religion. These interpretations often lead to disagreements about the true meaning of sacred texts, further complicating the idea that these texts are clear and consistent divine revelations. If a divine revelation is truly from an omniscient and benevolent God, why would it be subject to such confusion and misinterpretation? The problem is compounded by the fact that many religious traditions claim to possess exclusive access to the truth. For instance, Christianity asserts that it is the one true faith, while Islam claims that the Quran is the final and complete revelation of God. Similarly, certain sects of Buddhism and Hinduism believe that their particular teachings represent the highest form of spiritual truth. The existence of so many competing religious claims casts doubt on the notion that any one tradition can hold the exclusive keys to divine truth. If God is truly all-knowing and all-powerful, why would he allow so much confusion and division over his message? Additionally, some religious revelations are geographically and culturally specific, leading to the further problem of parochialism in divine revelation. For example, the Hebrew Bible Old Testament emerged in the context of ancient Israel, and reflects the particular cultural and historical experiences of that time. Similarly, the teachings of the Buddha were given in ancient India, while the Quran was revealed in the Arabian Peninsula. If these revelations are all from the same universal God, why would he reveal himself in such culturally specific ways, addressing the concerns of particular peoples at particular times, rather than offering a message that could be universally understood and applied across all cultures and societies? The argument from inconsistent revelations also touches on the problem of religious pluralism. If there is a single true God, why would he allow so many diverse and conflicting religious traditions to emerge over time? Religious pluralism suggests that no one religion can claim to have a monopoly on truth, and that the divine is expressed in many different ways across different cultures. This perspective raises the possibility that religious revelations are human interpretations of spiritual experiences, rather than the direct word of a single all-powerful deity. Moreover, the argument from inconsistent revelations brings into question the concept of divine hiddenness. If a perfect benevolent God exists, Why would he allow so much confusion and disagreement about his nature and will? Shouldn't a loving God make his revelation clear and accessible to all people, across all cultures and time? The fact that religious revelation appears so often to be shrouded in mystery and subject to human interpretation calls into question the idea that God has revealed himself in a consistent and unambiguous manner. In conclusion, the argument from inconsistent revelations presents a significant challenge to the belief in a singular divine truth. The vast differences between religious teachings, the inconsistencies within religious texts, and the role of human interpretation all point to the conclusion that divine revelation is not as clear and straightforward as many believers claim. The existence of so many conflicting religious traditions raises doubts about the credibility of any one revelation as the ultimate truth, and calls into question the nature of divine communication in a world filled with such confusion and diversity. Argument from beauty. The argument from beauty asserts that the existence of beauty in the world provides evidence for the existence of a divine creator, namely, God. This argument is based on the observation that beauty exists in nature, art, music, and human experience, in a way that goes beyond mere functional or practical considerations. The presence of beauty, whether in the complexity of the natural world, the profound emotional impact of music, or the intricate designs found in the universe, suggests that there is a purpose and intention behind the creation of the world, and that this purpose can be traced back to a divine intelligent source. The argument begins with the recognition that beauty is not necessary for survival or reproduction. For example, the colors of a sunset, the melody of a symphony, or the symmetry of a flower serve no immediate functional or biological purpose. These qualities are not essential for the continuation of life, yet they evoke a deep sense of aesthetic pleasure, wonder, and even spirituality in human beings. The fact that beauty exists often in unexpected or seemingly unnecessary places suggests that there is more to reality than mere physical or utilitarian concerns. One of the key points of the argument from beauty is that beauty is not something that can be reduced to evolutionary or biological explanations. While evolutionary theory can explain the development of traits and characteristics that are advantageous for survival, it does not fully account for the presence of beauty. The human appreciation of beauty goes beyond mere attraction to functional characteristics, such as symmetry or color contrast, which may have evolved for practical purposes like attracting mates or recognizing fertile environments. Rather, beauty often evokes transcendent feelings such as awe, admiration, and even a sense of the sacred. The experience of beauty seems to point beyond the physical world, and suggests the presence of a higher or divine source. For example, when people observe a breathtaking landscape, such as a mountain range or a vast ocean, they may feel a deep sense of connection or wonder that transcends the purely physical characteristics of the scene. This response suggests that beauty is not merely a product of sensory perception, but rather something that resonates deeply within the human spirit. The emotional and intellectual response to beauty is often so powerful that it seems to reflect a spiritual longing or a desire to connect with something beyond the natural world. The human capacity for experiencing beauty is another important aspect of the argument. Humans have a unique ability to recognize and create beauty. From the arts to architecture to music, humans engage in the act of creation with a sense of beauty and aesthetic judgment that goes beyond mere practicality. Whether it's the creation of a symphony, the design of a cathedral, or the crafting of a sculpture, humans have a remarkable ability to create works that evoke beauty and inspire awe. This suggests that the capacity for beauty is not simply the result of evolutionary development, but reflects an intrinsic aspect of the human experience that connects individuals to something greater than themselves. The argument also emphasizes that beauty is subjective, yet there is a remarkable degree of universality in the appreciation of beauty across cultures and time periods. While individuals and cultures may have different tastes or preferences, there are certain features of beauty that are universally recognized, such as symmetry, balance, and harmony. This universal recognition of beauty suggests that it is not merely a cultural construct, but something that exists beyond subjective perception. Beauty therefore points to a transcendent reality, something that exists outside of human opinion, and is part of the objective structure of the world. Furthermore, the existence of great works of art and music provides evidence for a creative intelligence behind the universe. The human capacity to produce such deeply moving works of beauty is seen as evidence of an innate connection to a higher source of creativity. Artists, composers, and writers often speak of their work as being inspired by something greater than themselves, something transcendent or divine. The very act of creating beauty then is seen as a reflection of the creative nature of God, who, according to this argument, has imbued the universe with beauty as a way of revealing his nature and drawing human beings closer to him. Additionally, the natural world is often cited as evidence of God's creative beauty. The complexity and wonder of nature, such as the intricate patterns of a snowflake, the diversity of life on earth, or the majestic grandeur of the night sky, are seen as reflections of divine artistry. The idea that the universe contains beauty in its design suggests that it was created with intention, care, and purpose. For example, the design of the human eye, the symmetry of flower petals, or the harmony of musical scales are seen as evidence that beauty is not an accident but a reflection of a higher or divine intelligence that brought the universe into being. Critics of the argument from beauty often argue that beauty can be explained through evolutionary or naturalistic processes. They suggest that the appreciation of beauty may have evolved as a way to enhance survival, such as attraction to certain physical traits that signal health or fertility. For example, the preference for symmetry in faces could be linked to the evolutionary advantage of recognizing healthy mates. While evolutionary explanations may account for some aspects of aesthetic preferences, they fail to explain why humans experience beauty in contexts that do not directly relate to survival, such as in art, music, or natural landscapes. Moreover, some critics argue that beauty is subjective and culturally dependent, meaning that it does not point to an objective or universal source. However, proponents of the argument assert that while personal preferences may vary, the existence of beauty as a transcendent reality, something that moves beyond human opinion, is universal. The experience of beauty often evokes a sense of awe, wonder, and transcendence that cannot be easily explained by naturalistic or evolutionary theories alone. In conclusion, the argument from beauty suggests that the existence of beauty in the world provides strong evidence for the existence of a divine creator. Beauty cannot be fully explained by evolutionary or biological factors alone, and its transcendent and universal nature points to a higher intelligence responsible for the creation of the universe. The human experience of beauty, whether in nature, art, or music, reflects a spiritual connection to the divine, suggesting that beauty is not an accident but a deliberate revelation of God's creative nature. The impossibility of omnipotence. One of the most central attributes ascribed to God in many religious traditions is omnipotence, an all-powerful, unlimited ability to do anything. However, the concept of omnipotence, when analyzed philosophically, raises significant challenges that question its coherence and possibility. The argument against omnipotence contends that the idea of an omnipotent being is not logically consistent, and therefore the existence of such a being is impossible. To begin with, the very notion of omnipotence entails a paradox. Can an omnipotent being perform logically impossible tasks? For instance, can an omnipotent God create a square circle or a married bachelor? These are not questions about the limits of power. They are questions about the limits of meaning. These tasks are contradictory by definition, and thus, no being, no matter how powerful, could accomplish them. In this sense, omnipotence cannot be understood as the ability to do anything, but rather it must be limited to doing what is logically possible. If omnipotence includes the power to perform logically impossible tasks, then the concept becomes meaningless, as the definition of omnipotence would then have no consistent or coherent content. Moreover, the idea of omnipotence leads to further contradictions when applied to other traditional divine attributes, such as omniscience and omnibenevolence. If an omnipotent God is capable of performing anything, could such a being also choose to limit their own power or knowledge? Would it be possible for God to make themselves less powerful or ignorant? The existence of such limitations would appear to contradict the very nature of omnipotence, which implies that power is unlimited. The coherence of omnipotence becomes even more problematic when we consider whether it is logically consistent for a being to possess all attributes simultaneously. An omnipotent being might face internal contradictions between these attributes, such as the conflict between being all-powerful and being all-good. The problem arises because omnipotence suggests that such a being could act in any way, even in ways that contradict their own omnibenevolence. For example, could an omnipotent being choose to perform an evil act, or cause harm to others? If so, how does this reconcile with the attribute of omnibenevolence? This introduces a tension between the characteristics that are traditionally ascribed to God. Another critique of omnipotence stems from the idea that an omnipotent being would need to exist outside the realm of time, as time itself imposes limitations on what can be done. If God is omnipotent, then God must be capable of acting beyond time, and if God exists outside of time, the very concept of choice and action becomes problematic. In order to perform an action, an entity must exist within time, experience causality, and undergo changes. A timeless being, by definition, cannot act in a temporal world, because action and change presuppose the passage of time. Thus the very nature of omnipotence seems to demand a contradiction, as an omnipotent being cannot simultaneously transcend time and be involved in the temporal world. Some theists may argue that omnipotence simply refers to the power to do anything that is possible in the realm of logic, and that logically impossible actions are not even tasks that power can be applied to. However, this raises another issue. If God cannot do the logically impossible, then there are limits to God's power, and therefore God is not omnipotent in the absolute sense. This would suggest that omnipotence, in the way that it is traditionally understood, is a concept that is inherently contradictory. An all-powerful being that is unable to do certain logically impossible actions is by definition not omnipotent in the strictest sense. Furthermore, omnipotence raises the question of why an omnipotent being would allow evil and suffering to exist in the world. If God is all-powerful, then why does God permit natural disasters, human suffering, and injustice? The presence of evil in the world creates an apparent conflict with the idea of omnipotence, as an all-powerful God would seemingly have the capacity to prevent or eliminate evil. This challenge is known as the problem of evil, and it casts doubt on the existence of a God who is both omnipotent and omnibenevolent. A truly omnipotent being would, by definition, have the power to prevent evil and suffering, yet the reality of a world filled with suffering undermines the claim that an omnipotent God exists. The argument from the impossibility of omnipotence also draws attention to the idea of freedom and moral responsibility. If God is omnipotent, and has the power to control every aspect of existence, then it becomes difficult to understand how humans can possess genuine free will. If God is capable of determining every action and outcome in the world, then human beings cannot truly be said to have free will, because every choice would be predetermined by an omnipotent being. This creates a problem for the notion of moral responsibility, as individuals would not be morally accountable for their actions if they were ultimately controlled by an omnipotent being. The presence of free will and moral responsibility, therefore, seems incompatible with the idea of a being who exercises total control over the universe. Additionally, omnipotence raises the issue of whether a being who is all-powerful would be limited by their own nature. An omnipotent being would necessarily be constrained by their nature, meaning that they could not act contrary to their essence. For instance, if God is omnibenevolent, then they cannot act in a malevolent way. If God is omniscient, then they cannot be ignorant. In this sense, omnipotence does not imply an absolute freedom to do anything, but rather the freedom to do anything that is in accordance with one's nature. This again challenges the idea that omnipotence means the ability to do absolutely anything, as even an omnipotent being would be bound by the nature of their existence. Finally, the concept of omnipotence is questioned by the fact that there is no empirical evidence for such a being. If omnipotence were a genuine attribute of God, we would expect to see clear evidence of omnipotence in the world, evidence that is consistent, observable, and testable. However, the absence of such evidence, combined with the logical contradictions and philosophical difficulties that arise from the concept of omnipotence, suggests that it may be an incoherent idea, rather than a coherent attribute of a divine being. The lack of demonstrable evidence for omnipotence further undermines the plausibility of the existence of an omnipotent God. In conclusion, the argument from the impossibility of omnipotence highlights the logical contradictions and philosophical challenges that arise when trying to conceptualize a being that is all-powerful. The idea of omnipotence leads to paradoxes, conflicts with other divine attributes, and problems with the existence of evil, free will, and moral responsibility. Moreover, the lack of empirical evidence for omnipotence casts doubt on the plausibility of such a being. As a result, the concept of omnipotence, when scrutinized, appears to be logically incoherent, making the existence of an omnipotent God increasingly difficult to defend. The argument from the resurrection of Jesus. The argument from the resurrection of Jesus asserts that the resurrection of Jesus Christ provides compelling evidence for the existence of God and the truth of Christian theism. According to this argument, the resurrection is a miraculous event that defies natural explanations, and offers direct proof of the divine nature of Jesus and the existence of a supernatural being, namely, God. The resurrection is considered by Christians to be the most significant event in human history, and it is central to Christian theology, offering both spiritual meaning and physical evidence of God's power and intervention in the world. One of the key aspects of the argument is that the resurrection of Jesus was a public event witnessed by numerous individuals, including his disciples, followers, and even critics. The New Testament claims that after Jesus was crucified, buried, and died, he was miraculously resurrected on the third day. According to the accounts, Jesus appeared to his followers, alive and physically tangible, after having been dead for several days. These appearances are said to have occurred at various times and places, and the risen Jesus was said to have interacted with people in a way that was consistent with his pre-crucifixion identity, further cementing the belief that his resurrection was not simply an illusion or hallucination, but a true historical event. The historicity of the resurrection is often cited as a powerful piece of evidence for the truth of Christianity. Scholars, both religious and secular, generally agree on certain historical facts surrounding the death of Jesus, including his crucifixion under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and the burial of his body in a tomb. The empty tomb is a key element in the resurrection argument. If the tomb in which Jesus was buried was indeed found empty, proponents argue that the only plausible explanation for the empty tomb is that Jesus had risen from the dead. In addition to the empty tomb, the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus to his followers are another piece of compelling evidence. The New Testament claims that Jesus appeared to various individuals and groups, including his apostles, over a span of 40 days after his resurrection. These appearances were often marked by dramatic and verifiable signs, such as showing his wounds to the disciples, eating food with them, and appearing in locked rooms. The number of witnesses to these events is significant. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:6 writes that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at once, many of whom were still alive and could verify the truth of these claims. Proponents argue that it would be highly unlikely for such a large group of individuals to have had a collective hallucination or fabricated a story about Jesus' resurrection. A significant component of the resurrection argument is the transformation of the disciples. Before the resurrection, the disciples were often portrayed as fearful, confused, and discouraged, particularly after the crucifixion of their leader. However, after they became convinced that Jesus had indeed risen from the dead, they were radically transformed. The apostles, particularly Peter and Paul, who had initially denied or persecuted Jesus, became bold advocates for the belief in his resurrection. They were willing to face persecution and even death for their testimony. It is argued that such a dramatic transformation is difficult to explain apart from the genuine belief in the resurrection. For these disciples, their willingness to suffer and die for their belief points to the historical reality of their experiences with the risen Jesus. Furthermore, the origin of Christianity itself is seen as evidence for the truth of the resurrection. The early Christian movement emerged in a hostile environment, particularly among Jews who would have had no motivation to invent a story about a crucified Messiah. In Judaism, the idea of a crucified Savior was considered absurd, as the Messiah was expected to be a triumphant figure, not one who suffered and died in such a humiliating manner. The rapid spread of Christianity, despite this cultural barrier, is difficult to explain if the resurrection was merely a myth or fabricated story. The belief in the resurrection provided the catalyst for the early church's growth, and this belief was firmly grounded in the conviction that Jesus had been physically raised from the dead. Alternative explanations for the resurrection, such as the swoon theory, the idea that Jesus didn't actually die, but merely fainted and later revived, or the stolen body theory, the idea that the disciples stole Jesus' body, are often dismissed by proponents of the resurrection argument as implausible. The swoon theory, for example, fails to account for the fact that Jesus was publicly executed in a brutal and public manner by Roman authorities, who were skilled at ensuring death during crucifixions. The stolen body theory, on the other hand, is difficult to support because it requires the disciples to have stolen Jesus' body, while risking severe consequences. Moreover, there is little reason to believe the disciples would have been motivated to fabricate such a story, knowing they would face persecution, suffering, and death for their beliefs. Critics of the resurrection argument often point to the lack of direct physical evidence for the resurrection. Since the resurrection is a supernatural event, it is not something that can be empirically tested or verified through modern scientific methods. Additionally, skeptics argue that the New Testament accounts, written by believers, may not be reliable as objective historical sources. They claim that these accounts are biased, and that the resurrection may have been a later mythical development, rather than an actual historical event. However, proponents counter that the empty tomb and the multiple eyewitness accounts of the resurrection provide compelling evidence. They argue that while it is impossible to scientifically verify supernatural events, the sheer number of witnesses, the historical context, and the early dating of the resurrection accounts make the resurrection a plausible and reasonable historical event. The resurrection is not just a theological doctrine, but a claim rooted in history, with historical evidence that points to the reality of the event. In conclusion, the argument from the resurrection of Jesus asserts that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the most compelling evidence for the existence of God and the truth of Christian theism. The empty tomb, the post-resurrection appearances, the transformation of the disciples, and the origin of Christianity all point to the resurrection as a historical reality. While critics may question the supernatural nature of the event, the argument maintains that the resurrection is the most reasonable explanation for the birth of Christianity and the testimony of early believers. The resurrection not only affirms the truth of Jesus' claims, but also provides direct evidence of the power and existence of God. The argument from evolution. The theory of evolution by natural selection presents a significant challenge to the belief in a divine creator. It posits that life on Earth developed gradually over millions of years through a process of natural selection and random mutation, rather than being designed or created by a purposeful intelligent being. This theory not only provides a robust scientific explanation for the diversity of life, but it also undermines the need for a creator to explain the existence of life forms. One of the key aspects of evolution is the idea that species evolve over time through small incremental changes that are passed down from generation to generation. These changes, which are largely driven by random genetic mutations, are naturally selected for survival in a given environment. Over vast periods of time, these small changes accumulate, leading to the emergence of new species and the extinction of others. This process of natural selection explains the complexity and variety of life without the need for a divine designer. Before the advent of evolutionary theory, many believed that life on Earth was the result of a deliberate creation by a god or some higher being. The apparent design and order of the natural world were seen as evidence of a purposeful creation. However, the theory of evolution offers a naturalistic explanation for the complexity and diversity of life, suggesting that what was once thought to be evidence of intelligent design can now be understood as the result of natural processes. The fact that species can evolve through natural selection makes the need for an intelligent designer unnecessary. Furthermore, evolution provides a naturalistic explanation for the apparent imperfections in the natural world. If a divine creator were responsible for the design of life, one might expect a world that operates flawlessly, with every organism perfectly adapted to its environment. However, evolution reveals that life is often marked by inefficiencies, imperfections, and suboptimal adaptations. For example, the human eye, which is often cited as an example of divine design, is far from perfect. It has a blind spot, and its design can lead to various vision problems. Evolutionary theory suggests that the human eye, like all other biological traits, developed gradually through natural processes, and while it may not be perfect, it has proven to be sufficient for survival and reproduction in its given environment. The argument from evolution also challenges the concept of creationism, the idea that life forms were specifically created by God in their present form. Creationism posits that species were created independently and are immutable, but evolution demonstrates that species are constantly changing over time in response to environmental pressures. The fossil record, which shows a gradual progression of life forms over millions of years, provides compelling evidence for the idea that life on Earth has evolved over time. This body of evidence is consistent with the theory of evolution and incompatible with the idea that species were created in their current form. Additionally, the argument from evolution suggests that the notion of a supernatural creator is increasingly unnecessary as our understanding of the natural world deepens. As science has uncovered more about the processes that govern life and the origins of the universe, the need to invoke a divine creator to explain the existence of life has diminished. While some theists attempt to reconcile evolution with belief in God, arguing that God created the mechanisms that drive evolution, the theory of evolution itself presents a naturalistic explanation for life that does not require the existence of a deity. One important aspect of the evolution argument is its challenge to the idea of design. For centuries, theologians and philosophers have pointed to the intricate structures in the natural world, such as the human eye or the complexity of the biological systems and living organisms, as evidence of divine design. However, the theory of evolution suggests that these features are the result of a gradual process of selection and adaptation, not the result of an intelligent designer. In fact, the very existence of features like the human appendix, once thought to be a vestigial organ, further undermines the notion of intelligent design. The appendix, which has no clear purpose in modern humans, is a remnant of our evolutionary past, and its existence is better explained by evolutionary theory than by the concept of divine creation. The argument from evolution also provides a naturalistic explanation for the origins of life. While traditional religious explanations often invoke a divine creator to explain the origins of life, evolution shows how life can arise from simpler, more primitive forms through gradual changes. The process of abiogenesis, the idea that life originated from non-living matter through natural processes, offers a scientific account of how life could have emerged on Earth without the need for a divine creator. While the exact mechanisms of abiogenesis are still a topic of research, the growing understanding of chemistry and biology suggests that life could have arisen through natural, non-supernatural processes. Critics of the argument from evolution often attempt to reconcile it with religious belief by proposing that evolution is simply the method through which God created life. However, this view does not negate the fundamental point of the evolution argument, that evolution provides a sufficient naturalistic explanation for the development of life on Earth, and there is no need to invoke a supernatural creator. The growing body of evidence supporting evolutionary theory continues to undermine the idea that life requires a divine origin. The argument from evolution presents a powerful challenge to the belief in a creator God. It offers a scientific, naturalistic explanation for the origin and diversity of life, without the need for divine intervention. The theory of evolution accounts for the complexity and variety of life forms, and provides a framework that does not require the existence of a supernatural designer. As our understanding of biology, genetics, and the history of life on Earth continues to grow, the argument from evolution becomes an increasingly compelling reason to question the necessity of a divine creator. The argument from miracles. The argument from miracles asserts that the occurrence of events that seem to defy the natural laws of physics and biology can serve as evidence for the existence of God. Miracles are typically understood as events that cannot be explained by natural causes or scientific laws, and are therefore considered to be acts of divine intervention. The belief in miracles spans across all major religions, and includes events such as healings, visions, prophecies, and other extraordinary occurrences. Proponents of the argument point to historical events in particular as evidence for the reality of miracles. One of the most commonly cited examples is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, a central tenet of Christianity. According to the New Testament, Jesus was crucified and died, only to rise from the dead 3 days later. For many Christians, the resurrection is not just a symbolic or metaphorical event, but a literal miracle that serves as a powerful confirmation of God's existence and divine power. The historical testimony of the disciples and early followers of Jesus, as well as the transformation in the lives of those who encountered the risen Christ, is often used as evidence of the miraculous nature of the event. In addition to religious miracles, many people throughout history have reported personal miracles, events that seem to occur through divine intervention. These can include spontaneous healings from diseases, protection from dangerous situations, or instances of divine guidance in moments of crisis. While these individual accounts vary greatly, proponents of the argument assert that the sheer number of testimonies throughout history is itself a compelling reason to consider the possibility of miracles as genuine acts of God. One of the key points in the argument from miracles is that these events seem to have occurred in situations where natural explanations simply do not suffice. For example, medical cases of spontaneous healing, where individuals recover from serious illness or injury, despite the absence of medical intervention, are often cited as miraculous. These healings are sometimes described as instantaneous or unexplainable by conventional medical science, leading proponents of the argument to suggest that they point to an intervention from a higher power. In many cases, the occurrence of miracles is seen as having a purpose beyond the mere event itself. Miracles are often viewed as a means through which God communicates with humanity, confirming divine messages, providing comfort or guidance, or demonstrating God's power and compassion. For example, the miracles described in the Bible are often presented as signs of God's love, mercy, and authority. The idea is that God uses miracles to reveal something about His nature and His plan for humanity. While some may argue that miracles are simply coincidences or misunderstood natural phenomena, proponents of the argument contend that the sheer improbability of these events happening by chance makes a natural explanation highly unlikely. For instance, when a person survives a near-death experience against all odds, or when a disease is suddenly cured without explanation, it may seem highly improbable that these events are merely the result of chance or physical laws at play. The logical structure of the argument from miracles often draws from the principles of probability. If the likelihood of an event occurring is exceedingly low according to natural laws, and yet it happens, then the probability of it being a miracle as opposed to a natural occurrence becomes much higher. In this view, the occurrence of a miracle is considered a highly significant event that requires a different explanation than the typical scientific or naturalistic one. Critics of the argument from miracles often contend that there is insufficient evidence for miracles, and that many supposed miracles can be explained by natural phenomena, psychological factors, or errors in perception. Skeptics also argue that the faith-based nature of many miracle claims makes them difficult to evaluate objectively. Furthermore, some propose that the human tendency to search for meaning in unusual events leads people to interpret ordinary occurrences as extraordinary. For example, people may misattribute unexplained healings or experiences to divine intervention, when they may simply be the result of the mind's ability to perceive what it wants to believe. Another common objection is that the occurrence of miracles raises the question of why God would intervene in some instances, but not in others. If God exists and has the power to perform miracles, why doesn't he prevent suffering or heal every illness? Why would he allow so much pain and evil in the world, only occasionally intervening with miraculous events? These are challenging questions that proponents of the argument from miracles must address in their defense of the claim that miracles are a sign of God's existence. Despite these criticisms, many religious believers continue to hold that miracles are strong evidence for the existence of God, as they represent direct interventions by a divine being in the world. The number of personal testimonies from people who claim to have witnessed or experienced miracles continues to be a significant factor in the argument. For believers, these personal accounts, along with the documented occurrences of miracles throughout history, serve as powerful indicators that God is actively involved in the world. In conclusion, the argument from miracles posits that the occurrence of events that defy natural laws, whether they are historical miracles, personal experiences, or unexplained phenomena, can be seen as evidence of God's existence. Miracles are often understood as acts of divine intervention, and are interpreted as signs of God's power and presence in the world. Despite objections and challenges, the widespread and recurring reports of miracles throughout human history continue to provide a compelling case for the belief in a transcendent supernatural being who actively engages with the world. The lack of divine intervention. One of the most persistent challenges to the belief in a benevolent, omnipotent God is the apparent lack of divine intervention in the world. Throughout history, religious texts and traditions have depicted God as actively involved in human affairs, guiding, protecting, and answering prayers. However, the real-world observation of suffering, evil, and injustice raises a significant problem. If an all-powerful and all-good God exists, why does he not intervene to prevent or alleviate the widespread suffering in the world? The lack of divine intervention in the face of enormous human suffering, natural disasters, and moral evil undermines the credibility of the belief in a deity that is both capable and willing to intervene on behalf of humanity. The problem of divine intervention is especially pronounced when we consider the scale of suffering in the world. Countless people endure pain, illness, poverty, and oppression, often without any hope of relief. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, hurricanes, and tsunamis have the capacity to wipe out entire communities, leaving untold numbers of innocent people dead or displaced. In addition to these physical and natural afflictions, humanity is also plagued by social injustices, wars, and violence. Despite the frequency and severity of these tragedies, there is little to no evidence of any divine intervention to stop them or to provide lasting relief. From a theological perspective, the lack of divine intervention raises significant questions about the nature of God. If God is omnipotent, then he has the power to intervene in the world and prevent suffering. If God is omnibenevolent, then he would presumably want to intervene to alleviate the suffering of his creation. Yet the reality is that the world appears to operate according to natural laws and human actions, without any noticeable interference from a divine being. This creates a tension between the traditional attributes ascribed to God and the observable state of the world. An all-powerful and all-good God who is actively concerned with the well-being of humanity would be expected to intervene to prevent unnecessary suffering, but such intervention seems conspicuously absent. The lack of divine intervention in the face of suffering is particularly troubling for those who hold to the idea of a personal God who cares for individuals and is involved in their lives. Many religious traditions emphasize the importance of prayer, claiming that God listens to the prayers of the faithful and responds to their needs. Yet, countless prayers go unanswered, and many people experience suffering, hardship and death without any apparent divine intervention. If God is indeed listening to prayers and possesses the power to act, then why does he not intervene to alleviate the suffering of those who are in desperate need? One possible explanation that some religious believers offer is that God allows suffering and evil to exist as part of a larger divine plan, which may be beyond human understanding. The concept of free will is often invoked as a justification for the lack of divine intervention. God, it is argued, allows humans to make their own choices, even if those choices lead to harm or suffering. According to this view, divine intervention would undermine human freedom, and the moral responsibility that comes with it. However, this explanation fails to address several critical issues. First, it is unclear why an all-powerful God could not intervene in ways that do not undermine human freedom, such as providing guidance, insight or opportunities for moral growth. Second, this explanation does not adequately account for natural suffering, such as that caused by natural disasters or diseases, which is not the result of human choices. The notion that an all-powerful God allows these kinds of suffering to occur for reasons that are beyond human understanding raises doubts about the nature and goodness of such a being. Moreover, the idea of free will and moral responsibility becomes increasingly problematic when we consider the suffering of innocent individuals, especially children, or those who have not had the opportunity to make meaningful moral choices. Why would a benevolent God allow such individuals to endure extreme suffering, simply to preserve human free will? The idea that free will justifies the existence of suffering becomes increasingly difficult to accept in light of the sheer magnitude of pain and injustice that exists in the world. Furthermore, the lack of divine intervention can be seen as inconsistent with the teachings of many religious traditions, which often portray God as actively intervening in human history. The Bible, for example, contains numerous accounts of divine intervention, including miracles, plagues, and other acts of supernatural power. If God once intervened in such dramatic ways, why does he no longer do so in the present day? Some may argue that God's ways are mysterious, and that his lack of intervention today is part of a greater plan that humans cannot comprehend. However, this response raises further doubts, as it seems arbitrary for God to have once acted in human history, but now remains silent and uninvolved. The lack of divine intervention also leads to the question of why God would allow certain events, such as wars, genocides, and atrocities, to occur without intervention. If God possesses the power to stop such evil, and if he is all good, then it would be expected that he would intervene to prevent such suffering. The fact that such events continue to happen with no divine interference calls into question the compatibility of an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God with the reality of the world. The persistence of evil and suffering suggests that either God is unwilling or unable to intervene, or that he simply does not exist. For those who argue from a naturalistic perspective, the lack of divine intervention supports the idea that the universe operates according to natural laws and that events are governed by physical causes rather than supernatural forces. In this view, natural events, such as earthquakes or diseases, are explained by geology, biology, and other sciences, without requiring divine intervention. The absence of divine action in the world further supports the idea that there is no supernatural being guiding or intervening in the course of human events. In a world governed by natural processes, the idea of divine intervention becomes unnecessary and implausible. The issue of divine intervention is also important in the context of religious diversity. If God exists and is actively involved in the world, then why is there such a lack of intervention in the lives of millions of people who adhere to non-Christian or non-theistic belief systems? The widespread lack of divine intervention in different parts of the world raises the question of why a benevolent and omnipotent God would choose to intervene only in certain contexts, or for certain people, while ignoring the suffering of others. The uneven distribution of divine favor, if one were to argue for it, suggests that divine intervention is selective, which undermines the claim that God acts in the best interest of all people. In conclusion, the lack of divine intervention in the world presents a significant challenge to the belief in an omnipotent, benevolent God. The widespread suffering, injustice, and evil that occur without any noticeable divine action call into question the nature of God and the plausibility of his existence. While some theists may argue that free will or a greater divine plan justifies the absence of intervention, these explanations are insufficient in addressing the scale of suffering and the apparent inconsistency between God's attributes and the state of the world. Ultimately, the absence of divine intervention raises serious doubts about the compatibility of an all-powerful, all-good deity with the reality of human experience. The moral argument. The moral argument for the existence of God is based on the idea that objective moral values and duties exist, and that these are best explained by the existence of a transcendent moral lawgiver. The central claim of this argument is that without God, there is no foundation for objective morality. In other words, the existence of moral facts, such as the intrinsic wrongness of actions like murder or torture, points toward the existence of a God who has instilled these moral laws in the world. One of the most compelling aspects of the moral argument is the existence of objective moral values. Objective morality refers to the idea that some actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of individual opinions or cultural beliefs. For example, it is widely accepted across cultures and societies that killing innocent people is morally wrong. This moral intuition persists even when people disagree on other issues, such as politics or religion. The fact that there seems to be a universal sense of right and wrong suggests that these moral truths are not merely the result of human invention, but are grounded in something beyond human beings. The moral law that governs our behavior is also seen as evidence for God's existence, because moral laws require a lawgiver. Just as legal systems in human societies require lawmakers, a moral law must also have a source. If morality is objective and binding, then it must be rooted in a source outside of humanity, something that is beyond subjective opinions and personal preferences. Many proponents of the moral argument argue that God is the best explanation for this source. For example, the philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that moral duties are binding and universal, and that they cannot be explained solely by human reason or social convention. Kant's theory suggested that in order for moral laws to have genuine authority, there must be a supreme moral lawgiver, someone who commands these duties and who can enforce them. This lawgiver, according to Kant, is God. Without such a being, morality would lack any objective foundation and would be reduced to mere human opinions. In addition to objective moral values, the moral argument also posits that the existence of moral duties requires a divine being. Moral duties are the obligations that individuals have toward one another. For example, we feel a duty to treat others with respect and to act justly. But if there is no God, the question arises, why should we obey moral laws at all? If morality is simply a human invention, why should we feel compelled to follow these rules? Without an external authoritative source for moral duties, there seems to be no reason to obey them beyond personal preference or societal pressures. The moral argument further asserts that humans have an innate sense of moral responsibility, an understanding of right and wrong, that goes beyond individual cultures and preferences. This is often referred to as the moral sense or conscience. Many people report a deep inner conviction that certain actions are right and others are wrong, even when they are not taught these moral principles. This universal moral intuition is seen as evidence of a moral law that transcends human beings, a law that has been instilled in humanity by God. Critics of the moral argument often contend that objective morality can be explained by evolution and social contract theories. From an evolutionary standpoint, the development of moral behavior may have been advantageous to the survival of human groups. By cooperating with others and adhering to social norms, individuals increase the chances of survival for the group as a whole. Over time, these behaviors become ingrained in human nature, and what we perceive as moral duties are simply social constructs designed to promote cooperation and stability. From the perspective of social contract theory, morality is based on mutual agreements made by individuals within a society. According to this view, moral duties arise because individuals agree, either implicitly or explicitly, to adhere to certain ethical norms in order to live together in a functioning society. In this framework, morality is not derived from a divine source, but rather from practical considerations about how humans should interact in order to maintain peace and order. However, the evolutionary explanation and the social contract theory face significant challenges. First, the evolutionary theory does not account for why we experience moral obligations that transcend survival instincts. For example, we often act morally even when doing so does not benefit our own survival or the survival of the group. Altruistic behaviors, such as helping a stranger or sacrificing oneself for others, are not always advantageous from an evolutionary standpoint. yet they are still widely regarded as moral actions. This raises the question of why such behavior exists, if it does not contribute to evolutionary success. Similarly, social contract theories struggle to explain the objectivity of moral duties. If morality is simply the result of a social contract, then moral duties would be contingent on the agreements made by different societies. However, we recognize that some moral duties are universal, such as the prohibition of murder, or the obligation to treat others with dignity, regardless of the specific social contract or cultural context. The existence of these universal moral values is difficult to explain without the assumption of an objective transcendent moral lawgiver. The problem of moral evil is another objection to the moral argument. If God is the source of objective morality, then why do humans commit acts of extreme cruelty and injustice? Why does God allow the existence of evil, suffering, and immoral behavior? This is a central issue in the philosophy of religion, often referred to as the problem of evil. The existence of moral evil presents a challenge to the belief in a benevolent and omnipotent God. Many defenders of the moral argument respond to this challenge by pointing out that moral evil exists because humans have free will. Free will is necessary for genuine moral choices to be made. If God were to intervene and prevent all instances of moral wrongdoing, this would undermine human freedom and the ability to make meaningful moral choices. The presence of evil, then, is a result of human misuse of free will, not a contradiction of God's existence or goodness. Despite these objections, the moral argument remains a powerful argument for the existence of God. The presence of objective moral values and duties, the universal sense of moral responsibility, and the need for a moral lawgiver, all point toward the existence of a transcendent God. Without such a being, it is difficult to explain why we perceive moral obligations that are binding on all people, regardless of culture or personal belief. The moral argument offers a compelling case for the belief that God is the source of morality, and that objective moral values are rooted in the divine. The argument from science naturalism. The argument from science, or naturalism, posits that the natural world operates according to laws and processes that can be fully explained by scientific inquiry, without invoking the need for a divine creator or supernatural forces. According to this perspective, the scientific method, which relies on observation, experimentation, and empirical evidence, is the most reliable way to understand the universe and its origins. As such, naturalism directly challenges the need for belief in a god or any supernatural being, suggesting that the universe can be explained entirely through natural causes. At the core of the argument from science is the success of scientific theories in explaining a wide range of phenomena, from the origins of life to the structure of the universe. The theory of evolution, for example, provides a comprehensive explanation for the diversity of life on Earth, demonstrating that complex organisms arise from simpler forms through natural processes over long periods of time. The evidence for evolution, including fossil records, genetic data, and observed instances of natural selection, makes the idea of a divine designer unnecessary, as evolution offers a naturalistic explanation for the development of life. Similarly, the Big Bang theory provides a naturalistic explanation for the origin of the universe. The evidence supporting the Big Bang, including the observed expansion of the universe and the cosmic microwave background radiation, shows that the universe began as a singularity and expanded over billions of years. This theory offers a coherent and well-supported explanation for the origin and development of the cosmos, without requiring the intervention of a divine being. The success of cosmology and physics in explaining the structure and evolution of the universe further weakens the argument for a creator, as natural processes seem to provide sufficient explanations for the phenomena observed in the cosmos. In addition to the success of scientific theories in explaining the origin and development of the universe and life, the argument from science highlights the power of the scientific method to uncover the mechanisms behind natural events. For example, advances in fields like physics, chemistry, and biology have allowed scientists to understand the laws of motion, the behavior of subatomic particles, the biochemical processes that sustain life, and much more. These discoveries show that the universe operates according to a set of predictable, testable laws, and that natural processes are capable of producing complex systems without the need for supernatural intervention. The success of scientific explanations also extends to areas such as geology, meteorology, and astronomy, where natural forces are understood to drive the processes that shape the Earth, weather patterns and celestial bodies. From the formation of mountains to the movements of tectonic plates, science offers explanations based on physical laws and observable evidence, without the need to invoke a divine cause. The reliability and success of these scientific explanations reinforce the idea that natural processes, rather than supernatural causes, are responsible for the events that occur in the world. Another aspect of the argument from science is the principle of parsimony, or Occam's razor, which states that when confronted with competing explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation requiring the fewest assumptions is usually the best. In the case of the origin of the universe and life, naturalistic explanations such as the Big Bang theory and evolution require fewer assumptions than the hypotheses of a divine creator. These scientific theories are based on observable evidence and testable predictions, whereas the existence of a divine creator is not directly observable and cannot be tested in the same way. The principle of parsimony suggests that the naturalistic explanations provided by science are more plausible than the hypotheses of a supernatural being. Furthermore, naturalism asserts that science has no need for the supernatural to explain the phenomena of the universe. Throughout history, many phenomena that were once attributed to divine intervention, such as lightning, earthquakes, or the movement of the stars, have been shown to have natural explanations. As scientific knowledge has advanced, the need for supernatural explanations has diminished, leading to a worldview in which natural causes are sufficient to explain the workings of the universe. This trend, known as the decline of the supernatural, suggests that as science continues to make progress, the belief in a divine creator becomes increasingly unnecessary. Additionally, the argument from science contends that the natural world is self-sustaining and does not require an ongoing divine intervention. Once natural laws were set into motion, they have operated independently of any supernatural influence. The processes of evolution, the formation of galaxies, and the behavior of particles in quantum mechanics all unfold according to established physical laws. In this view, the universe functions like a well-oiled machine, with no need for continuous guidance or oversight from a creator. This perspective contrasts with the idea of a God who is actively involved in the world, shaping events and intervening in human affairs. Critics of the argument for science might argue that science has not yet answered all of the questions about the origins of the universe, or the complexity of life, leaving room for the possibility of a creator. However, this argument from science does not claim that science has all the answers. It simply asserts that the natural explanations we currently have are sufficient to explain much of what we observe. As science continues to advance, it is likely that we will continue to uncover natural explanations for the phenomena that were once attributed to supernatural causes. The gap in our knowledge, often referred to as the God of the gaps argument, is shrinking over time, and the role of a divine creator in explaining the natural world continues to diminish. The success of science in providing naturalistic explanations for a wide range of phenomena raises further doubts about the need for a divine creator. As scientific knowledge expands, the necessity of invoking supernatural causes for natural events becomes increasingly unlikely. If the natural world can be fully understood through the methods of science, then the hypothesis of a creator seems redundant, unnecessary, and unsupported by evidence. The argument from science, naturalism, suggests that the universe, and everything within it, can be explained through natural processes, and that the concept of a divine creator is not required to account for the workings of the cosmos. In conclusion, the argument from science presents a powerful case for naturalism, asserting that the universe operates according to natural laws and processes that can be fully explained by scientific inquiry. The success of scientific theories such as evolution, the Big Bang, and the laws of physics in explaining the origins and workings of the universe undermines the need for belief in a divine creator. The reliance on empirical evidence, observation, and the principle of parsimony suggests that naturalistic explanations are far more plausible than the hypotheses of a supernatural being. As science continues to advance, the argument from science strengthens the position that the universe can be understood without resorting to the supernatural, making the concept of a divine creator increasingly unnecessary.